As the boy's tiny finger pointed to the faded shirt, the father's heart stopped. "Sir, your son gave me this shirt yesterday." It wasn't possible. His son had been gone for months. But in that moment, everything he thought he knew about grief was about to change. Have you ever experienced a moment where a small detail, like a shirt, a gift, or a memory, suddenly opened a floodgate of emotion? What do you think the boy's words mean for the father? Jonathan Harris sat alone in the small, dimly lit room of his house. It was mid-afternoon, but the heavy curtains were drawn, casting a shadow over the space. The house, once filled with the joyful noise of his young son's laughter, now felt hollow and cold. Jonathan had never intended for it to be this way, but grief had taken root in the corners of his life, slowly seeping into every crevice. He stared blankly at the walls, his fingers loosely wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. It had been months since Ryan, his 6-year-old son, had passed. A tragic accident on a rainy evening that left his little body crumpled and lifeless. Jonathan still couldn't wrap his mind around it, couldn't accept it. There were days when it felt as if Ryan had simply gone out to play and would walk back through the door any minute. But then, the silence reminded him. The empty space at the dinner table. The toys still scattered across the living room, abandoned like the dreams of a life they would never get to share. Jonathan's gaze shifted to the mantel above the fireplace, where a picture of Ryan sat next to a candle that had long since burned out. The photo captured Ryan in a moment of pure joy, grinning from ear to ear, his small hands clutched tightly around a soccer ball. It was the kind of innocence that stung now, more than it had when Ryan was alive. A sigh escaped Jonathan's lips, the weight of it heavier than he expected. He had tried so hard to move on, to heal, but nothing seemed to help. Work had become a distraction, but even that wasn't enough to fill the void. His phone buzzed from the table, and he snapped out of his trance. It was a message from his sister, Clara. "I know you're busy, but I'm coming over tomorrow to check on you. It's been too long, John." He typed a quick reply, telling her he was fine. He was always fine now, but it wasn't true. He hadn't been fine in months. The silence in the room was broken by the sound of footsteps outside. Jonathan lifted his head, hearing a soft voice echoing through the air. His curiosity piqued. He stood, walking cautiously toward the window. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the figure of a small boy walking across his front yard. The boy was no older than 5 or 6, his small feet shuffling along the sidewalk in a striped t-shirt and faded jeans. Jonathan didn't recognize him. Was he lost? The boy stopped right in front of the house and turned toward the window, his bright eyes catching Jonathan's gaze through the glass. Jonathan froze for a moment, wondering if he had somehow wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The boy grinned, showing a mouth full of missing teeth, and began to walk closer to the door. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, then opened it, the cool breeze brushing his face. "Can I help you, kid?" Jonathan asked, trying to mask the confusion in his voice. The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at Jonathan with wide, innocent eyes, as if he had been waiting for the right moment to speak. "Your son gave me this shirt yesterday," the boy said, his voice matter-of-fact, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Jonathan's heart clenched. The boy's words hit him harder than any physical blow could have. His son. The boy didn't know Ryan. How could he possibly know anything about Ryan? Jonathan knelt down, trying to process the boy's words. The small shirt he was wearing, the same shirt Jonathan had last seen his son wearing just days before the accident, was too much to ignore. The boy seemed to read Jonathan's confusion. He looked down at the shirt, then back up at the man standing before him. "He gave it to me. Yesterday. I think he wanted me to have it. He said it was his favorite." Jonathan's mind raced. The boy's words sent a wave of disbelief and hope crashing through him, the kind of feeling he had tried to shut down since Ryan's death. Could it be possible? Could Ryan have somehow reached beyond the veil? He forced himself to focus. "You're sure it was my son?" he asked, trying to steady his voice. The boy nodded, his small hand lifting up to tug at the collar's collar. "Yeah, he said he liked it when it was sunny and we could play together. He told me I should wear it so I could be happy too." The words struck a chord in Jonathan. He felt his throat tighten, and for a brief moment he was lost in the memory of his son's laughter. That sound, so pure, so full of life, now felt like a distant echo. The boy's innocence was so raw, so unaffected by the world around him. In that moment, Jonathan saw not just a stranger, but a reflection of the boy he had lost. For a second, Jonathan didn't know what to say. What could he possibly say? He couldn't let himself believe in something so impossible, could he? But his chest ached in a way it hadn't in months, the hope flickering like a candle struggling to stay lit in the wind. The boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his small hands pressed against the edges of his shirt as if unsure how much longer he could stand there. "I have to go," the boy said suddenly, a simple wave of his hand signaling the end of their interaction. Jonathan watched him turn to walk away, his feet shuffling through the grass like he had done this 1,000 times before. As the boy reached the end of the yard, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Goodbye, mister," the boy called out with a smile. And then he was gone. Jonathan stood there for a long moment, the air heavy with his thoughts. His hands trembled as he reached for the doorframe, the cool wood grounding him in the present moment. He could hear the faint hum of his own heartbeat in his ears, but everything else felt muffled. Did the boy really know his son? Or had it all been a coincidence, a strange but harmless mix-up? But deep down, Jonathan knew he couldn't ignore what had just happened. The words the boy had spoken, the shirt, the memory, were all too real. The boy had given him a gift in a way, without even realizing it. A gift of hope. Have you ever experienced a moment that made you question everything you thought you knew about life and death? Can a simple word or gesture change the way you see the world? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Jonathan couldn't shake the boy's words from his mind. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the silence in the house felt oppressive. Too quiet, too empty. He had only stepped out into the yard for a moment to clear his head, but the fresh air did nothing to calm the racing thoughts that gripped him. He paced back and forth in the living room, his feet restless, his mind unsettled. The boy's words echoed like a constant hum. "Your son gave me this shirt yesterday." Jonathan had tried to push it out of his mind, tell himself it was a mistake, that the boy must have gotten confused. Maybe the shirt was something his son had given him before the accident, some simple, innocent mix-up. But that excuse felt weak, thin, and utterly unsatisfactory. As in some kind of denial, Jonathan went to the kitchen, grabbed the half-empty coffee cup, and took a long sip. The bitterness of it burned his throat, but it didn't dull the sharp ache in his chest. The boy's smile, the way he had spoken about Ryan as though he was still alive, as though everything was fine, haunted him. Jonathan set the cup down with a clink, his hands trembling ever so slightly. He had never been the type to believe in the supernatural. He had always been grounded, logical, practical. But the way the boy had looked at him, so unburdened, so sure, left him with a sense of unease, a sense that he was missing something. Unable to stay still any longer, Jonathan grabbed his jacket and stormed out the front door. The cool wind bit at his skin as he made his way to the yard. His eyes scanned the space, as if hoping to see the boy again, to get some kind of answer to the question that gnawed at him. But there was nothing. No sign of the boy, no lingering trace of what had just happened. Jonathan stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot. His gaze fell to the patch of grass where the boy had stood. The wind rustled through the leaves of the trees in the distance, but otherwise the world was silent, still.
"Get a grip, Jonathan!" He cursed under his breath and made his way to the back of the yard. He needed to do something, anything, to get this out of his head. But then, as if guided by some unseen force, Jonathan's eyes were drawn to the old wooden bench tucked beneath the large oak tree in the far corner of the yard. It had been Ryan's favorite spot. He used to sit there every afternoon, his tiny feet swinging as he read his books, or just stared up at the sky, lost in his own world. Jonathan couldn't resist. He walked over and sat down on the bench, brushing his fingers across the worn wood, tracing the familiar grooves. It still smelled faintly like the pine trees nearby, a scent that used to comfort him. But now, it only reminded him of what he had lost. Closing his eyes, he leaned back, letting his mind wander to the memories of Ryan. The way he would run around the yard, chasing after butterflies. The way he'd drag Jonathan into the living room for impromptu dance parties, his giggles filling the air like music. Ryan had always been full of life, full of questions, full of joy. And now, he was gone. Jonathan exhaled sharply, his chest tightening. He rubbed his face with his hands, willing himself not to cry. He couldn't afford to break down. Not again. He had done that too many times already. The memories, once so comforting, felt like knives in his heart now. Every corner of the house, every piece of furniture, every photograph, they were all reminders of his son's absence. But then, just as he was about to rise from the bench and return to the house, something caught his eye. There, on the ground, near the base of the oak tree, was a small patch of fabric lying in the grass. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. It was the same striped shirt, the one the boy had been wearing. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He bent down, his fingers shaking as he picked it up. The fabric was soft, well-worn, and unmistakable. He had seen the shirt countless times before, on his own son. Ryan's shirt. Jonathan's pulse quickened. This couldn't be happening. How could the boy have had this shirt? How could he have gotten it? He hadn't seen the boy since the brief encounter earlier, but now, as he held the fabric in his hand, it felt like the air around him was charged with something different, something inexplicable. Was it possible? Could it be that Ryan had somehow given this shirt to the boy? Or was this just some cruel coincidence, an odd, unsettling moment of déjà vu? No, that's not it. This can't be real. Jonathan wanted to dismiss it, to throw the shirt back into the grass and walk away. But his fingers clenched around the fabric, his mind fighting the truth that wanted to break free. He knew deep down that something had shifted, something that couldn't be ignored. Just as he was about to stand up from the bench, a voice cut through the stillness. "Sir?" Jonathan froze. He didn't have to turn around to know it was the boy. He could feel the presence behind him, the weight of the question hanging in the air. The boy's voice was soft, almost hesitant as he stepped into Jonathan's line of sight. I think I forgot to tell you something. The shirt, he told me to give it to you." A sharp breath caught in Jonathan's throat. The weight of grief suddenly pressed down on him, suffocating him. He felt an overwhelming need to bury the memory, to block it out, to pretend the boy hadn't said anything,
to pretend this was just some trick his mind was playing on him. He couldn't face the possibility that his son might still be out there somehow, that somehow, in some strange way, Ryan was reaching out to him. It felt like too much to bear. Jonathan slammed the door behind him, retreating into the house as if he could escape the thoughts that had started to consume him. The weight of the shirt in his hand felt heavier with every passing second, its presence growing more oppressive. He set it down on the kitchen counter, his hands shaking as he did. There was a tightness in his chest, a constriction in his throat that wouldn't go away. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The grief, the guilt, it was all threatening to flood him, and he wasn't ready. He wasn't strong enough to face it. He walked to the living room, his footsteps echoing through the silence. The space felt foreign to him now, like it belonged to someone else. He couldn't look at the toys scattered across the floor, the little shoes left out in the hallway. Ryan's things, his son's things. How could he have let all of this fall apart? How had he let himself fall apart? His mind kept circling back to the boy's words, and the more he thought about them, the more they felt like a trap. He was being drawn into something he didn't understand, and part of him wanted to fight it, to push it away, to scream no. He couldn't allow himself to believe that Ryan was somehow trying to reach him. He couldn't allow that hope to grow, only to have it torn away again. A sharp knock on the door broke through his thoughts. Jonathan froze, his heart leaping in his chest. He hadn't expected anyone, and the sudden interruption only added to the tension already building inside him. With a sigh, he dragged himself to the door. Standing there, looking completely unfazed by the emotions that had just gripped Jonathan, was Claire, his sister. "Hey, John," she said, her voice casual, though her eyes immediately darted to the tight expression on his face. "I thought I'd stop by and check on you. You've been avoiding my calls." Jonathan didn't know how to respond. His sister's presence, once a comfort, now felt like another reminder of everything that had gone wrong. He opened the door wider, letting her in, though the heaviness in the air was thick enough to choke him. "I've been busy," he mumbled, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Claire stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She gave him a long, assessing look, her brow furrowing as she studied his face. She knew him too well, knew when something was off, and right now everything about Jonathan seemed off. "You don't look fine, John," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You know you don't have to carry all of this on your own, right?" Jonathan's throat tightened, and he fought the urge to turn away. It wasn't that he didn't want his sister's support. It was that he wasn't ready to let anyone in. Not now. Not when he was still so raw. "I'm okay," he said, trying to sound convincing. Claire didn't buy it for a second. "Come on, I'm here for you. Talk to me." Jonathan looked at her, his face twisted in an expression of frustration. He wasn't ready to talk. Not about the boy, not about the shirt, not about any of it. He didn't want to face it. He didn't want to face the possibility of something more, something beyond what he understood. It would break him completely. I can't," Jonathan said, his voice barely a whisper. He felt a tear threatening to break free, but quickly wiped it away. "I can't do this right now." Claire was silent for a moment, watching him closely, her eyes filled with understanding and concern. She stepped closer and placed a hand gently on his arm, offering him a brief, comforting squeeze. "I'm not going anywhere, John," she said softly. "But when you're ready, I'm here." Jonathan nodded, the weight of her words heavy in his chest. He didn't know if he would ever be ready. But for now, he needed to escape. He needed to push this all down and forget for just a little while. The tension between them hung thick, and finally Jonathan spoke again, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere. "I'll be fine. Really." But deep down, he knew he was lying, and it wasn't just to her. He was lying to himself. What do you think is stopping Jonathan from accepting what's happening? Have you ever struggled to face something you weren't ready to deal with? The evening stretched long into the night, a heavy silence falling over the house. Jonathan's mind was a chaotic whirlwind, struggling to make sense of everything that had happened. The boy's words, the shirt, the memories that had surged back into his heart with such raw intensity. He couldn't escape any of it. Every corner of the house seemed to mock him, holding on to the pieces of his son's presence that he had tried so hard to shut away. Jonathan sat in his favorite chair by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The warmth of the flames did little to soothe him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of something life-altering, yet terrifying. He felt a coldness creeping in, not from the air but from within, like he was about to lose his grip on everything he had built to protect himself from his grief. The knock on the door came just as the last of the firelight faded. Jonathan stiffened. He hadn't been expecting anyone, and Claire had already left hours ago. He didn't feel like seeing anyone else, but the knock was persistent, and it was too late for someone to just be checking in. He stood slowly, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders, and made his way to the door. He didn't even need to look through the peephole to know who it was. The boy stood on his porch again, the same striped shirt, the same innocent, unburdened expression. Jonathan's heart lurched. How was this even possible? Before he could even speak, the boy raised his hand, holding something out.
I think this is for you, the boy said, his small voice quivering ever so slightly, as though he wasn't entirely sure how to explain himself. He held out a small, crumpled envelope, clearly not something he had been carrying for long. Jonathan stared at the boy, still processing the strange events of earlier. The encounter from that afternoon felt like a dream, too surreal to be real. He opened his mouth, but words eluded him. What could he say? The boy's gaze never wavered from Jonathan's face. He said you'd need this. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't asked for anything more. He didn't want to know anything more. But here it was, another message from beyond. Another push, a nudge from the boy who was, in a way, becoming a conduit for Ryan's presence. Jonathan's fingers closed around the envelope, and as he did, the boy smiled brightly, like he had done this 1,000 times. "Take care, mister," before turning around, walking back down the porch steps with an almost eerie confidence. Jonathan didn't call after him, didn't stop him. He just stood there, frozen, holding the envelope in his hand as the boy disappeared into the street. For a long time, Jonathan stood there, the chill in the air creeping into his bones, the silence thick around him. He could feel the weight of the envelope in his palm, the crinkled paper beneath his fingertips. His mind screamed at him to throw it away, to slam the door shut and retreat into his grief, into the numbness he had grown so accustomed to. But there was something in him, some unspoken pull that refused to let go of the mystery. He had to know. He closed the door softly behind him and walked into the living room, sitting down heavily on the couch. Slowly, with trembling hands, he tore open the envelope. Inside was a small piece of paper, the writing barely legible, but there was no mistaking the handwriting. "Dad," the note began, in his son's familiar scrawl. "I miss you. I know it's hard right now, but it's going to be okay. I want you to be happy again. I'm still here, watching over you, and I'm so proud of you. Don't be sad, okay?" The tears came fast and uncontrollable, catching Jonathan by surprise. The paper trembled in his hand as he read the words over and over again.
the weight of them sinking into his chest like a stone. "I'll always love you, Dad, and I'll never leave you." For a long time, Jonathan just sat there, unable to process what he had read, unable to make sense of the emotions crashing through him. The boy, the message, his son's handwriting, it all felt like an impossible dream, a hallucination. The boy's face flashed in his mind, and for the first time in months, Jonathan allowed himself to believe, just for a second, that Ryan might still be out there, that somehow, some way, Ryan was trying to reach him, trying to tell him something that he had been too afraid to hear. The note slipped from his fingers as Jonathan's chest heaved with emotion, the weight of it threatening to break him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could feel was the overwhelming loss of his son, the aching void that had consumed him for so long. And yet now, there was something else, something fragile, something that made him believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for healing.
His phone buzzed suddenly, pulling him out of his daze. It was a text from Claire. "John, please just talk to me. I'm really worried. We can't keep pretending everything is fine." He stared at the screen, the words barely registering in his mind. He felt so far removed from everything around him. The note in his hand was a lifeline, but it also felt like a curse. It was as though he was being dragged in two directions, toward the possibility of closure, of reconnecting with his son, and away from everything he knew, into the unknown. Jonathan couldn't respond to Claire. He couldn't explain what was happening, not when he didn't understand it himself. He didn't want to involve anyone else in this, didn't want to drag anyone into the fragile hope he had started to feel. He wasn't sure he could bear the weight of it, let alone share it with someone else. His phone buzzed again, and for the first time he threw it across the room, the noise of it crashing onto the floor barely registering. The note, still lying on the couch beside him, felt like the only reality he could hold on to. Jonathan is struggling to face what's happening, grief and hope pulling him in opposite directions. Have you ever faced something that made you question what you knew to be true, but you weren't ready to accept it? How did you cope? Jonathan sat there for what felt like hours, his mind awash with the cascade of emotions brought on by the note. His heart was heavy with the words written in Ryan's familiar scrawl, and yet, beneath the sorrow, there was something else. A quiet sense of disbelief, as if he were holding on to a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. He couldn't bear the thought of it. The thought that Ryan, his beautiful, vibrant boy, was still reaching out to him from beyond the grave, or that this strange series of events was some twisted trick his mind had conjured. No, it was too much to understand, too much to accept, but at the same time, he couldn't deny it. With a trembling hand, he reached for the photograph of Ryan on the mantel, the same one that had been sitting there, untouched for months. Ryan's beaming smile in the frame seemed so foreign now, as if the boy in the picture belonged to someone else, not the son Jonathan had known. He ran his fingers over the glass, feeling the chill against his skin, before carefully taking the photo from its place. The ache in his chest deepened as memories flooded back, memories that felt both too painful to relive and too precious to forget. He leaned back into the couch, closing his eyes, and let the memories take hold. It had been a warm summer day, just a few weeks before the accident. Jonathan had been standing on the porch, watching Ryan chase after a small yellow butterfly, his tiny legs running with determination. Jonathan had smiled, his heart swelling with love. Ryan had always been full of energy, full of life. He had a laugh that could fill any room, a laugh that Jonathan would give anything to hear again. "Dad!" Ryan had called. looking back with the mischievous grin. "Come on, race me!" Jonathan had chuckled, shaking his head. He couldn't help but laugh at his son's infectious enthusiasm. "All right, you win," he'd said, raising his hands in surrender.
Ryan had bounded back to him, his eyes wide with excitement. "I told you, I'm faster than you," he had crowed, and Jonathan had scooped him up into his arms, spinning him around. The air had been full of sunlight, the kind of golden light that made everything seem perfect, as if nothing could ever go wrong. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt like it was in place, like the world was just as it should be. Jonathan had promised himself that he would savor that moment, that simple joy of watching his son so carefree, so full of life. But just a few days later, it was all gone. The accident had come without warning. A storm had rolled in faster than anyone had expected. Jonathan had been running errands, his mind focused on the mundane tasks of life. It wasn't until he received the call that everything shattered. The rain had caused a crash, a tragic accident on the slick roads, and Ryan, his son, had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The world had spun out of control in that moment. He had been told Ryan didn't make it. The doctors had done what they could, but the injuries had been too severe. He could still hear the words in his head. "I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but your son is gone." Jonathan had barely registered what happened next, only that he had stood there in shock, staring at the sterile white walls of the hospital, as if time itself had frozen. He didn't remember much after that, just a blur of faces, and then suddenly he was home again, alone in the quiet. The house had never felt so empty. The toys Ryan had left scattered across the floor, the little shoes by the front door, the books Ryan had been reading. Every single thing was a painful reminder that the laughter, the joy, the innocence of his son had been ripped away. Jonathan opened his eyes and looked at the photo again, blinking back the tears that had gathered. The pain was still fresh, as if the loss had happened only yesterday. The note, the boy, had shattered his carefully constructed wall of numbness, and now, as much as he wanted to ignore it, the truth kept pushing forward. He stood up abruptly, the photo still clutched in his hand. He needed to move, needed to do something, anything, that would help him make sense of what was happening. He grabbed his jacket and stormed outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. The darkness seemed to press in around him, but Jonathan welcomed it. The dark was familiar in a way. The grief had always felt like a shadow, constantly hanging over him, but at least in the dark he could hide from it. His feet carried him to the back of the yard, to the oak tree where Ryan had spent so many hours playing. The memory of his son's small form sitting on the bench flashed in his mind. Jonathan stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of pine and earth, the cold air filling his lungs. And then his eyes caught something in the grass, a small, worn baseball cap, Ryan's cap. He had forgotten about it, buried somewhere in the depths of his grief. He knelt down, picking it up, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to sink into the memory of his son wearing it, of tossing the ball back and forth, of teaching him how to throw a proper pitch. The tears came then, uncontrollable, hot and painful. He couldn't hold them back anymore. Ryan was gone. He would never see him grow up, never see him go to school, never hear his laughter again. It felt like the universe had ripped a part of his soul away, leaving only the fragments of what was left. But here, in the darkness, Jonathan allowed himself to feel it, the grief, the longing, the desperation. For a long time, he just sat there, the cap held tightly in his hands, the tears falling freely. And then, through the thick veil of emotion, he felt it. A slight shift in the air, a presence that made his skin tingle. He looked up slowly, half expecting to see the boy standing there again. But the yard was empty. The boy was gone. Jonathan let out a shaky breath, wiping his eyes. He didn't know what to make of all of this. The boy, the shirt, the note. It was too much for him to comprehend, too much to take in all at once. But he couldn't ignore it. He couldn't ignore the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Ryan wasn't completely gone. Maybe the love they had shared wasn't confined to the moments they had spent together. Jonathan stood up, the baseball cap still pressed tightly to his chest, and made his way back to the house, knowing that what he was facing was bigger than any pain he had ever known. And yet somehow, he had to face it. For Ryan. Sitting at the kitchen table, Jonathan stared down at his phone. Claire had sent several more texts that morning, each one more urgent than the last. He had yet to respond to any of them. He didn't know how to explain what was happening, didn't know how to put it into words. He didn't even understand it himself. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. He jumped slightly, startled by the sound. Jonathan stood up, his legs unsteady as he walked to the door. His hand lingered on the doorknob for a moment before he opened it, half expecting to see the boy again. But instead, it was Claire, standing on the other side, looking both worried and determined. "John," she said softly, her gaze searching his face, "I'm not leaving until we talk. I know you're not fine. I can see it in your eyes." She stepped past him before he could say anything, entering the house like she had every right to. Jonathan closed the door behind her, the silence in the room thick and heavy. Claire turned to face him, her eyes softened by concern. "What's really going on?" she asked gently, her voice steady but full of love. "You don't have to go through this alone. Whatever it is, I'll help you." Jonathan swallowed, his throat tight. He couldn't speak. Not yet. But the words he'd been holding inside for so long began to surface, pushed forward by the overwhelming pull of the connection he'd felt last night. The grief, the love, the inexplicable feeling that maybe, just maybe, Ryan hadn't really left him at all. He sat down on the couch, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. I don't know what's happening, Claire." His voice was hoarse, the weight of the words nearly suffocating him. "There's this boy. He came to my door yesterday. He said he had a shirt from Ryan." He paused, closing his eyes as if trying to gather the strength to continue. "It sounds insane, doesn't it?" Claire didn't say anything right away, and for a moment, Jonathan thought maybe she was going to laugh, to dismiss him as being caught in some grief-stricken delusion. But she didn't. Instead, she sat next to him, her eyes locked onto his with such warmth that Jonathan could feel her empathy radiating from her. "Tell me everything," Claire said softly, her voice the anchor he needed. "I'm here. Whatever it is, I'm here." Jonathan took a deep breath, and then, in a voice tinged with disbelief and wonder, he began to tell her everything. The boy, the shirt, the note. He explained how it felt like Ryan was still reaching out to him, how the boy seemed to know things no one else could, and how despite all of his skepticism, a small part of him couldn't help but believe that it was real, that Ryan was still somehow with him. As Jonathan spoke, he could feel the weight on his chest begin to lift. Claire didn't interrupt. She simply listened, her expression gentle, her presence a balm to his raw, aching soul. When he finished, there was a long silence between them. Jonathan felt vulnerable, as though he had just laid his deepest fears and most sacred memories bare. He couldn't look at Claire, afraid of what she might think. But after a long moment, she spoke. "John, I don't know what's going on, but I know one thing." Her voice was soft but firm. "You don't need to understand it right now. You don't need to have all the answers. But what you're feeling, this connection, this hope, it's real. And it's okay to believe in it." Jonathan's eyes welled up with tears, his chest tightening again as her words sank in. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. The idea that it was okay to hope, that it was okay to let himself believe that Ryan hadn't truly left. "It's okay to feel this, John," Claire continued, her voice steady. "You don't have to bury it. You don't have to fight it. You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling right now, John." Jonathan blinked back tears, the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. For the first time in months, he felt like someone truly understood, not just the pain, but the fragile hope that had started to bloom in his heart. Claire reached over and placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "You're not crazy, John. Sometimes love doesn't end when someone leaves. Sometimes it finds a way to reach us when we least expect it." Jonathan nodded slowly, the words resonating deep within him. For so long, he had believed that the love he shared with Ryan had been severed by death, that it was gone forever. But now, for the first time, he began to realize that maybe love didn't just disappear. Maybe it lingered. Maybe it was still reaching out to him. As Claire stayed by his side, they talked for hours, sharing memories of Ryan, laughing and crying, slowly allowing the weight of their grief to loosen just enough to make room for healing. It was a quiet, tender moment, but it was one Jonathan would remember for the rest of his life. And through it all, the feeling in his heart grew stronger. The belief that Ryan hadn't truly gone, that somehow, some way, his son was still with him, watching, loving, waiting for him to heal. Jonathan has just begun to accept that his grief doesn't have to define him, and that the love for his son can still be alive. Have you ever felt that love never truly leaves, even after someone you care about is gone? For the next few days, Jonathan tried to keep himself grounded. He spent his time in the house, sorting through old photos of Ryan, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The boy, the shirt, the note, none of it fit neatly into his world. It was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Too many things Jonathan couldn't explain. But still, he clung to the fragile hope that had begun to bloom in his chest. He spent a lot of time thinking about what Claire had said, about love not ending when someone leaves. It was comforting, and for the first time in months, Jonathan allowed himself to feel something other than pain. He allowed himself to hope. But the tension, the unease, never fully left him. There were still moments when he felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, like if he stepped too far, he might fall into something he couldn't understand or control. On the fifth night, everything shattered. It was late, and Jonathan was sitting in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but he couldn't bring himself to go to bed. Every picture of Ryan was a reminder of what he had lost, of how everything had been stolen in an instant. It hurt, but it also felt like the only way he could still keep his son alive. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. Jonathan looked up, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't expected anyone. His mind immediately flashed to the boy, and his chest tightened. He stood up quickly, his legs stiff from sitting so long, and walked to the door. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. It was the boy again, standing on the porch, as calm and unaffected as before. But something was different. This time, there was no smile on the boy's face, no simple declaration of a shirt or a note. Instead, the boy's eyes were wide, uncertain, like he had just been through something he couldn't fully comprehend. Jonathan opened the door wider. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight. He had no idea what to expect, but he couldn't deny the anxiety that gnawed at him. The boy hesitated for a moment, his small hands clutching something tightly to his chest. He looked up at Jonathan with those innocent eyes, but there was something there, something darker, something Jonathan hadn't seen before. Fear. "Sir, I don't know how to tell you this," the boy said, his voice wavering. Jonathan's pulse quickened. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. "What's going on?" The boy swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. I think your son's trying to talk to you." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. His entire body went cold. He could feel the blood rushing in his ears, his vision blurring at the edges. What did he just say? The boy reached into his small backpack and pulled out something. A small wooden toy car. Jonathan didn't understand at first. It was a simple thing, a toy car with chipped paint and wheels that barely turned. But when the boy held it out to him, Jonathan's breath caught. It was Ryan's. Jonathan could feel his knees buckling, his hands shaking as he reached out to take the toy. It was the exact one Ryan had carried with him everywhere, a gift from Jonathan himself when he was just a toddler. Jonathan had forgotten about it, buried it in the memories of his grief. And now here it was, in the hands of a stranger, a boy who seemed to know more than he should. "Where did you get this?" Jonathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. How do you have this?" The boy took a step back, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He gave it to me. He said I should bring it to you." Jonathan's stomach twisted in knots. The world felt like it was shifting beneath him, and for the first time, the fragile thread of hope that had been holding him together snapped. Everything he had started to believe, everything he had tried to hold on to, now it was all breaking apart. The boy stepped back a few more paces, his feet unsteady as he stared up at Jonathan. I don't know what it means. I don't understand, but I think you need to hear him. He said you'd understand." Jonathan stood there, staring at the toy in his hand. His mind was reeling, his thoughts racing in every direction. How could this be real? How could Ryan still be reaching out to him? Through this boy? Through a toy? It didn't make sense.
But the longer he stood there, the more he could feel it, the pull of something that couldn't be explained, the sense that his son had never really left him. The ache in his heart was sharper than ever before, the grief more consuming. I can't do this," Jonathan whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at the boy, his face stricken with a mix of fear and disbelief. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep holding on to this hope when I don't even know if it's real. I don't know if I'm just imagining all of this." The boy didn't say anything. He just looked at Jonathan with those wide eyes, as if waiting for him to understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the boy spoke again. "He's trying to tell you something," the boy said softly, and I think you have to listen." The words hit Jonathan like a tidal wave, crashing over him, drowning him in the flood of his emotions. His hand clenched tighter around the toy, his chest tight with a pain so raw it felt like his heart would break. I can't do this," Jonathan said again, shaking his head, his voice cracking. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep holding on to this illusion of hope when I don't even know if it's real. I don't know if I'm just imagining all of this." The boy didn't say anything. He just looked at Jonathan with those wide eyes, as if waiting for him to understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the boy spoke again. "He's trying to tell you something," the boy said softly, and I think you have to listen." The words hit Jonathan like a tidal wave, crashing over him, drowning him in the flood of his emotions. His hand clenched tighter around the toy, his chest tight with a pain so raw it felt like his heart would break. I can't do this," Jonathan said again, shaking his head, his voice desperate. "I can't keep opening myself up to this illusion of hope when I know the truth. My son is gone, and I'm not strong enough to handle this. Not again." The boy didn't say anything more. He turned and started to walk away, his small feet tapping softly on the pavement. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest, a sense of deep regret already settling in. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to face this overwhelming wave of grief and hope that threatened to consume him. But the boy's words echoed in his mind as he watched him walk away, his small figure disappearing into the night. "He's trying to tell you something." Jonathan stood frozen, the toy still clutched in his hand. His breath caught in his throat as he turned and walked into the house, the weight of everything he had been avoiding finally crashing down on him. Jonathan has reached a breaking point, torn between hope and fear. Have you ever faced a moment when hope felt too overwhelming to embrace? How did you find the courage to keep moving forward?
Sending a simple message. "John, I know you're struggling. Please, let me in. Let me help." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, then typed a response, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I don't know what's real anymore, Claire. I don't know if I'm losing my mind, or if Ryan is really trying to reach me from wherever he is." He stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the send button. He wasn't sure what kind of answer he was hoping for. Maybe he was looking for reassurance. Maybe he was seeking validation for the fear that had been clawing at him. He was scared of what it meant to let go, to fully embrace the possibility that Ryan's presence could still be with him. The phone buzzed again before he could send it. It was a reply from Claire. "Whatever you're going through, you don't have to do it alone. You're still my brother, John. Please, let me help." The words were so simple, but they cut through the fog of confusion in Jonathan's mind like a knife. Let me help. It was the one thing he hadn't allowed anyone to do, help him. He had been so alone in his grief, so consumed by the pain of losing Ryan, that he had built a wall around himself. He had isolated himself, believing that if he let anyone in, the walls of his heart would collapse. But Claire was offering him something he had denied himself for so long, a chance to heal, a chance to move forward. But what if moving forward meant losing Ryan for good? Jonathan's heart tightened. The idea of moving on, of allowing himself to truly heal, felt like a betrayal. How could he let go of his son? How could he accept that Ryan was truly gone, that he would never feel his son's hand in his again? The weight of it pressed on him, threatening to drown him. But then, as if by instinct, his eyes fell on the wooden toy car once more. It wasn't just a toy. It was a memory, a part of Ryan. And it wasn't gone. It was still here. With him. Maybe not in the form Jonathan had known, but it was still here, still reaching out to him. He exhaled shakily, placing the card down gently on the counter. It wasn't an illusion. This connection, this feeling, was real. Jonathan had spent so much time avoiding it, denying it, but it had already begun. Whether he wanted it to or not, he had already opened his heart to the possibility that love didn't end with death. Ryan's love hadn't died. It had transformed into something different, something that didn't need to be explained. Jonathan stood up, his feet moving automatically toward the door. He had spent enough time hiding from the truth. It was time to make a choice. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. The stars scattered across the sky like pinpricks of light. Jonathan breathed in deeply, letting the fresh air clear his head. He walked down the porch steps and into the yard, where the oak tree stood silently in the distance, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms in silent prayer. Ryan's old bench sat beneath it, the place where so many memories had been made. Jonathan approached it slowly, the weight of his decision hanging in the air. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he would ever fully understand this strange experience, or if the grief would ever completely leave him. But he was done running from it. He sat down on the bench, his fingers brushing the rough wood as if it were a lifeline. In the stillness of the night, Jonathan closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel. Not just the pain, but the love. The love he had for Ryan. The love that had never truly left him. It was still there, within him, in every breath, in every moment. I'm ready, he thought. I'm ready to move forward. I'm ready to hold on to the love, not the loss. It was then, in that quiet moment of surrender, that the first tears came. Not of sorrow, but of release, of acceptance. Jonathan had spent so much of the last few months holding on to his grief, afraid of what it would mean to let go. But in this moment, he realized that letting go wasn't about forgetting. It was about opening himself to the possibility of healing, opening himself to the idea that love, in whatever form it came, would always remain with him. The soft rustling of the leaves above him reminded him of the times he and Ryan had sat here together. And though Ryan wasn't sitting beside him now, Jonathan could feel him there, could feel his presence in the very air. Jonathan wiped his eyes, a small, bittersweet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Maybe Ryan really was trying to tell him something. Maybe the boy wasn't just a messenger, but a guide, someone who had been sent to remind him that love didn't end. It simply transformed. He stood up slowly, the weight in his chest now lighter than it had been in months. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt a sense of peace. He could hear his son's laughter in his heart, and it was a sound that filled him with warmth, not sorrow. Ryan hadn't gone. He would always be with him, and Jonathan would be okay. Jonathan has finally chosen to embrace love and healing, letting go of his fear of losing his son. Have you ever faced a choice between holding on to grief or letting yourself heal? What helped you make that decision? The morning light was soft and warm, spilling through the windows like a gentle reminder that a new day had arrived. Jonathan stood by the kitchen window, his hand resting on the counter as he watched the sun climb higher in the sky. The air was still cool, but the warmth of the sun seemed to echo through him in a way that felt different than before. He felt it in his chest, the weight he had been carrying for so long, slowly lifting. It was strange how quickly everything had changed. Just days ago, he had been consumed by a grief so deep he had thought he might drown in it. And now, sitting quietly in his kitchen, a sense of peace had begun to settle over him, a peace he hadn't known in months.
Jonathan glanced down at the wooden toy car, still sitting on the counter where he had left it the night before. He had spent hours in the yard, sitting beneath the oak tree, allowing himself to feel the memories of Ryan, the love that hadn't faded. He hadn't expected a moment of clarity, but it had come. Not in some grand revelation, but in the quiet surrender to what was real, the love that remained. The love that Ryan had left behind was still a part of him and always would be. For the first time, Jonathan understood. Grief had never been about holding on to the past. It had been about learning to carry it, learning to make space for both the sorrow and the joy that came with loving someone. Even though Ryan was gone, Jonathan could still hold him in his heart, and that was enough. The phone buzzed again, breaking Jonathan's quiet reverie. It was Claire. "How are you?" her message read. He smiled to himself, his fingers hovering over the screen for a moment. He could almost hear her voice, the concern in her tone. She had been the one to hold him together through it all, and now he wanted to share this new feeling of peace with her. The weight of everything he had been holding back felt lighter now, and he knew it was time to let her in fully. Time to let everyone in. He began typing, his words coming easily now. "I'm better, Claire. I think I've finally found some peace." He paused for a moment, reflecting on the years of pain he had carried, the years he had spent avoiding the truth, and then he added, "I'm learning to hold on to the love. I'm learning to let go of the fear." He hit send and sat back, his heart feeling full in a way it hadn't for so long. For the first time, he felt like he was beginning to heal, not by forgetting Ryan or letting go of his memories, but by accepting that the love they had shared could continue. It was still there, in every corner of his life, in the little things, in the places they had once shared. An hour later, Claire arrived, her car pulling into the driveway. Jonathan had already made coffee, and he felt a quiet sense of gratitude as he saw her step out of the car. He opened the door before she could knock, and her eyes softened when she saw him standing there, a hint of peace in his expression. "I got your message," she said with a smile, stepping inside. "I'm glad to hear it, John." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Come sit with me. I made coffee." As they sat down at the kitchen table, Jonathan felt the weight of the conversation that was about to happen. It wasn't about explaining everything. It was about sharing the change in his heart, the acceptance that had come so unexpectedly. "I think I've finally figured it out," Jonathan said quietly, looking across the table at Claire. "Ryan isn't gone. Not really. I've been holding on to him in all the wrong ways, trying to hold on to the grief. But the love he gave me, love that we shared, it's still here. It's in me."
Claire's eyes glistened as she reached across the table, her hand resting over his. "I'm so proud of you, John," she said, her voice full of warmth and affection. "You've been through so much. But you're right. Ryan's love will always be with you. And I'll be here too, every step of the way." For the first time in so long, Jonathan felt like he wasn't alone in this. Not just because Claire was physically present, but because he had finally allowed himself to accept the reality of his grief and healing. He didn't need to understand everything. He didn't need all the answers. What mattered was the truth he had come to understand. Love transcended everything, even death. And in that, there was peace.